Hello and welcome to this episode of the About Time podcast, Series 2. But just like Series 1, this is a great chance for me to hang out with people who have worked with me, influenced me, and inspired me. And in today's case, it's all of those. So I'm delighted to welcome Jean Boulton, my friend and guest. Jean, brilliant that you're here.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, thank you for inviting me, and good to see you. We've known each other a long time, I think.
Yeah. Now, Jean, it's probably a completely unfair question to ask. When you introduce yourselves to people, given all the things you do, what do you say? What do you?
I am an R. um, I think of myself as kind of embedded in complexity. So, an exponent of complexity thinking, something I've been deeply interested in since at least the 1990s, if not earlier. Something that kind of drives my thinking and my worldview, my work, and indeed probably how I live.
Right. Okay. Now, I think what we should do is say there are lots of people around at the moment who claim to be working with complexity, but you are like you really, really do it, and you are the author of at least two books. I'm going to hold up one. I think you should hold up the other one.
Yeah.
Yes, right. These are proper books on the field. And um, just recently, I mean, you have been out speaking all over the place to scientific societies and audiences near and far, from systems thinking institutes to goodness knows what. I mean, and you come from a background, I know, but it's probably not the only thread you draw on of theoretical physics. So do you want to say something about how on earth, I mean, how on earth you come to be doing this stuff?
Yes, no. Well, I think there are a couple of threads to it. So, I studied physics at university, and then went on to do a PhD in quantum physics. And quantum physics is a field theory, so it's questioning the nature of reality. There's a whole kind of exploration of what does it mean for anything to be there at all. So it kind of early in my 20s made me kind of think quite deeply about some of the assumptions we make about science, about objectivity, about reality, and so on. So that was a very important thread. um, and I guess it coupled with a thread that I think, looking back on it, was kind of all, I was a kind of little girl who wrote poetry about blackbirds' footprints in the snow, and was an imaginative child.
Mm.
Um, and by the time I got into my teens, I think I was really, a kind of a seeker, as people would say. I was asking why questions, and reading books on Buddhism and Taoism and
Yeah,
ecology, and just generally kind of interested in why am I here? Why is anybody here? What
yeah.
are things, from quite a young age. But to pick up the physics thread, having done a PhD in physics, and then I worked as a physicist doing mathematical models, computational models of very simple quantum systems. I eventually decided that I wanted to move away from that, and I moved initially into technical consulting, and into signal processing and designing, believe it or not, navigate underwater navigation systems and
All right. Okay.
things. And from there, I heard about this thing called an MBA, and decided that I fancied doing one of those. So I persuaded the consultancy I worked with that they'd like to send me to Cranfield to do an
Right.
MBA. And
So,
in
so
this kind of,
when are we? Where in time are we at this point?
we are in 1987, I think.
So
I
this
think
is quite an, I mean, relatively early MBAs. I mean, you know, I mean, not everybody had one in
no,
1980
oh,
something.
no, it was a thing. No, it was definitely a thing.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
part-time MBA at Cranfield was it was
Yeah.
terrific,
Yeah.
absolutely terrific. Um, So from there, I decided that I fancied being a management consultant. So you can see my life became a sort of random walk at that time. So I moved into that, got a job with Hay Management Consultants.
Oh,
And to cut a long story short, eventually I joined a large corporate for a while as a senior manager. I'd been helping to reorganize them, and then they said, "Why don't you join?" So that was the 3 years, and then I went back to Hay Management Consultants and ran the strategy and organization arm of their business for a few years. And um, I think what the experience of being a director, I was busy re-engineering, literally an engineering division, 2,000 people in a large corporate before I went back to Hay. And you begin to realize that all the things you're taught on MBA courses and, as kind of management techniques, they don't really work. And I remember a moment in going to see some people in a particular department, and I was quite young. I was the only woman at my level in the organisation.
yeah.
I was actually much younger than many of the people who worked for me. And I rock up in this department of engineers, and this guy looks at me and he said, "You can reorganize us as much as you like, Jean, but when aeroplanes fall out of the sky, we have to go and look at them. And whether you tell me it's my job or not, I've still got to go." And it was a real moment for me of thinking, yeah, you're right. We sort of believe all this stuff. What's going on? And Hay at the time had Peter Senge come
Oh, yeah.
to a meeting, and I remember just this one slide where he put up a slide which had a leaf on it and a machine, like a clock or something. And he was saying,
Yeah.
which is an organization most like? And I'm going, well, it's obviously, it's like, it's organic, it's evolving and connected. And um, that took me on. I went to a talk by Margaret Wheatley, and I
Yeah.
eventually came across. Then there were all the books in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Chaos by Gleick, Complexity. I can't think
Mm.
who wrote that one now. And what I began to realize is that my quantum physics background was really very relevant to this management world. That some of the ideas about fields, about interconnections, about organic adapting, emerging, were part of my physics background, and in my particular physics background, and they kind of married with my management experience and my consultancy experience, and kind of also started to marry with this idea of, well, what are things really like, and why does it matter, and where are we heading, that had remained with me through from my teenage years. So I then randomly I went to give a talk at Cranfield where I did my MBA, and Peter Allen, who used to
Oh,
work with Prigogine, was rather awkwardly situated within the management school at Cranfield. And it was an aha moment. It was like, this is it. This is what I can do. There's something here where I can help Peter to make this much more expressible to managers. I can learn from him. He was absolutely, fantastic person to work with. Quite difficult for people to understand, but given I had equally a background in theoretical physics, I could kind of prod him and
yeah. Yeah.
understand and explore. So it was an absolute, perfect place for me to join, and I joined the staff there, and the rest is history, really. So that was in the late 1990s, but this interest really had been driven throughout the 90s. I'd read other people, and it was a perfect opportunity to really get to grips with these ideas for myself.
Mm. Wonderful. So I suppose there are probably some people um, who might be listening to this who may be going, great story, I understand it, but this complexity thing, what is it? So
Yeah,
can you say something about that?
sure. Um, so the work, I'm going to go back a little if the people listening to this can bear with the story. So Prigoghine's work, Ilya Prigogine, Nobel Prize winner 1977, was intrigued by some research that had been done by two Russians, Belousov and Zhabotinsky, who discovered in this particular chemical experiment that forms and patterns were emerging in these petri dishes in this kind of this chemical system, and everybody thought it was a mistake. There didn't seem to be any explanation of why order was emerging out of chaos. But Prigogine realized that the reason for this is that the chemical experiment was open to energy and from its context. So it was an open pumped system, and so this idea that you would get patterns emerging as opposed to the normal behaviours of closed systems in gases and liquids, which kind of dissipate into featureless dust or to featurelessness, was being reversed. So entropy was being reversed in this kind of local situation. So that was the start of his thinking, and it became called complexity theory. Now, what he was particularly interested in, and Peter Allen, who moved this work into ecology and then into human systems, was to understand from a micro level, from the level of the constituent elements, so of people, or in ecologies of bluebells in with yew trees, going back to the kind of microscopic, as they called it. How did the macroscopic patterns emerge and stabilize? So their interest was in what are the conditions? How do we understand this kind of behavior of relationships, of interweaving, of connectivity, and what is it about that explains how patterns of relationships can emerge, stabilize, and ultimately dissolve. So for me, the core of complexity theory is this scientific question of how do we understand, what can we know? It's one thing to say the world is complex, get over it. The world is complex, we have to manage it. We have to kind of, we have to kind of navigate it, or those kind of words. The word that we used was, how do we embrace it? Because if we understand the science of that complexity, then we will do a better job of living and working in a complex world. So that's where I come from, and it's very similar. It has similar traditions. It's what Edgar Morin has called general complexity. So this isn't it's not a description of the world through mathematical models. It's not a description of the world through kind of various heuristic abstractions. It's really saying, as do the biologists, why do cells self-regulate? Why do ecologies find a form and it's different? This ecology is different. No, this wood is different from that wood. So it's an understanding of the science of that, which then we can use to decide how to live and work in the world. So I'll pause there, but I can say a bit more about the implications of that. But that's where I'm coming from. It's from Ralph Stacey did something very similar in terms of looking at complex responsive processes. So again, he was going back to the micro. He was saying, how do cultures emerge? How do we might be then operated on by cultures, but the devil is in the detail, that actually what happens is this kind of complex interweaving, particularity, historically shaped, contextually shaped interaction that hold the key to really understanding what emerges and what stabilizes or not. So there you go. I hope that helps.
It does. Well, thank you. So this book is about that, and it's also about more than that, isn't it? Or maybe it's not about more than that, but it's about that from two frames.
Yeah. So yes, or even yes. So yeah.
No, you can say I'm wrong if it's
No,
more
no,
about more than two-thirds.
no. I was about to launch into what is the book about, and I wondered if you wanted to say anything more.
Well, do you know? I mean, no, do you know? I think it would be
Yeah.
brilliant because I think, I mean, I love this book, right? I mean, what I love about it is it's full of like little chapters that
Yes.
are really easy to approach, but they're massively profound, and you can go off in all directions from any one of them. You
Yes.
know, so maybe, yeah. Could you? I want everybody to go and buy your book. You see, buy Jean's book,
Well,
but to save us all buying it right now, tell us a bit about it.
yes. Well, the motivation for the book came from this real interest in going back to the science of the complex world, not, you know,
Hmm.
to give you an example, people talk about deterministic chaos, the maths of deterministic chaos. Very exciting piece of mathematics. I remember all computers in the 1980s used to plot sort of these shapes, these strange attractors on computer systems and so on. But deterministic chaos is a very simple form of mathematics. It suggests that there are fractals, that things are self-similar, identical at different levels. This is a function of the mathematics, but it doesn't appear in the kind of the science of complexity that comes from looking at these emergent patterns in the Belousov-Zhabotinsky experiments, or in looking at biological systems. And even if you just think about it, you don't find that kind of behavior in social systems. So I was really interested to build on what I'd learned from Peter, um, and to really explore, what does the science of complexity really say. And the thing that I realized that Prigogine had said, in his book From Being to Becoming, and was the point about the complex world is it's always moving. It's like what creates stability is the kind of constant moving and adapting and stabilizing of relationships, but slightly shifting of relationships. The ability to kind of maneuver, to learn, for new things to come in. But the paradox is that the very thing that creates stability is movement. And so this processual idea is something that's very embedded in Prigogine's work, but I've kind of highlighted it in this work and talked about process complexity. And so that's a kind of one of the big themes of the book, is explaining what that means, that it has a paradoxical nature. I talk about emergence, I talk about patterning, I talk about the importance of the particularities of context, etc., etc. So I explore the science of that and explain, I build up why it makes sense to emphasize this always becoming, always shifting movement, this flow. The
Mm.
problem of talking about complex systems, for example, is you've already decided you're going to look at this thing that you've defined its boundaries of, and
And,
you'll
and that's kind of the definition of a system, is it? That's a thing with a boundary, is that
well, it is for many people. What
right?
what this processual view would talk about more is patterning, which is a looser term. And if I said to you, well, that my wood over here behaves like a system, it's very tempting for me to define the boundaries of the wood. Whereas what's more useful, something that Brian Goodwin used to do very much, and was very much part of this kind of tradition, is you observe the wood, you commune with the wood, and it shows you where its boundaries are. You can start to see, well, actually, that doesn't matter. Those bits don't matter very much to what's going on, but these bits do. So it's something that even in a sense, your definition of boundaries emerges. But what process complexity is trying to look at is not only what you find in stability in what you might call the complex adaptive system, but when does it stop adapting? When does it run away? When does it collapse? So it's taking a much broader view of the complex world than would be defined by boundaries. Now, the story about Taoism, and the reason that came in, apart from the fact I'd always been interested in it, is that true story. Peter Allen came back to Cranfield in something like 2003, 2006, I can't remember, clutching this particular copy of the Tao Te Ching, which he'd picked up in London to read on the train back to Cranfield. And it was a new translation by a couple of guys called Ames and Hall, and had a very long introduction. And Peter said, just look at this. It reads exactly like a complexity theory textbook. And so I of course picked up the book and started to read it and thought, well, it does. There's all sorts of things we talked in the first book about episodic change. The fact that sometimes things don't change for a long time, then they suddenly change. The Tao Te Ching talks about the door is not always open, and then novelty gushes forward, etc., etc. And Ames and Hall described the processual, contextual nature of Taoist thinking. And it was entrancing. So I started to get interested in how very different bodies of knowledge, how could it be in the 5th century BC that these guys got there and, we do all this sophisticated stuff and then we sort of end up in the same place. And then I started to notice, well, Buddhism, as did Joanna Macy, our lovely friend, her PhD was on systems thinking and dependent co-arising, which is an idea that's embedded in Buddhism. So Buddhism, Heraclitus ideas of we never step in the same river twice. But then I started to find out, I watched a TV series about the brain by David Eagleman, and thought, well, he's saying the same thing about the way the brain works. It has plasticity, but it tends to have stable patterns. They're shaped by our past. Sometimes things get locked in and we wish they wouldn't be locked in, but there's always movement, etc., etc. So the book was partly to describe this kind of, going back to the science. I start with Newton and go on even into quantum physics. It's quite, it's designed to be scientific and to ground these ideas in science. But it also follows the tradition of Taoism and explains that, and then kind of says, well, look, they're saying the same things in different language, but the Taoist book has more to offer as well. There was a particular bit, for example, where the Taoists talk about being sensitive to the beginning of the beginning. And what some complexity scientists, theorists think, it seems to me, the modelers think about is they think about stability and patterns, but they don't necessarily say that you have to pay attention to the tiny cracks and fissures and new things that are coming in that have the potential to change everything. And it was something that Peter Allen felt was his greatest contribution in this field, was this, he called it invasion, this idea that something new appears and it kind of reforms, it can kind of create a complete changes to the stability of the patterns that are there, to change the landscape, the terrain of possibilities. So it's not something he didn't say, but he didn't, he used different language. So here we have a tradition in Taoism and a tradition in science, in physics and biology, and people like Ralph Stacey looking at the details of human interaction, and Paul Cilliers looking at it from a more philosophical point of view. And they're saying very similar things. So what I wanted to say in the book was, I'm not going to tell you it's right. I'm going to say, is this interesting? This seems to me to replicate my experience of being in the world. It's a pragmatist view as well. It comes from the process philosophers. The pragmatists say, don't believe me, go and find out for yourself. The Buddha says, don't believe me, go and find out for yourself. So I'm saying to the reader, go and find out for yourself. But look, this is my experience of the world. This reflects better how the world shows up to me than a mechanical worldview or an equilibrium worldview or whatever it is. So the book is really trying to show how these very different starting points, including process philosophies and pragmatism, they're derived from something that Dewey, I think, called a naturalistic metaphysics. The idea that we understand the nature of things from the bottom up. not in a Platonic sense from having these ideas about universality or from the top down. And then the book then, as you say, goes into, well, what does that mean for economics? Well, what does it mean for management? What does it mean? I particularly got interested in this book in some of the political writers, political writers who lived through things. So people like Václav Havel writing The Power of the Powerless about Czechoslovakia, Maria Ressa writing about the Philippines, Eke Temel Kuran writing about, she wrote a fabulous book called From Democracy to Dictatorship. And they equally, their analysis has this kind of path dependent, emerging, something that's shaped by what we do. It's kind of summarized by the Taoist phrase, the path is made by walking, which is kind of the core. So in other words, we co-evolve the future through our collective actions and intentions. But if you start to get very huge inequalities of power and reduce diversity and lock things in to the point when it becomes very unassailable, then all these political writers are saying, challenge early, know your moral lines. If it goes too far, it becomes incredibly difficult to challenge, which is kind of very prescient for today with geopolitical unrest, populism, climate change, and everything else. So the book kind of ends with kind of considering those kind of big picture issues. So that's and sorry, and just one other thing. I also wanted to. I don't need interviews. No, I just keep talking. I also wanted to write the book, as you say, in kind of think pieces. I a bit like the Tao Te Ching. You go back to the Tao Te Ching and you read half a page and you think about it for a week, and it reveals itself to you. And I don't feel as grand as that, but I wanted to write something where you could find a bit that really you tussled with. I want people to tussle with it. You don't have to agree. You have to think about the implications, connect your own knowledge with it, read it through your own lens. And it's written in that kind of way.
Yeah, which I think is delightful, by the way, because it's not a common thing, I think, in heavy duty academic fields.
Yeah.
And that includes complexity. There have been plenty of people who've written about this from positions of great certainty, being absolutely sure that they're right.
Yes.
And I don't think that's what this does. I think it invites people to be curious.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to trust your own experience, reflect on what you see around you. The damage of complexity is when people go, complexity theory is about fractals, or it's about tipping points, or it's about, whatever. And many of those models disagree with each other. So Juan Bertalanffy, for example, talks about equifinality, which means wherever you start, you end up in the same place, which is true in certain circumstances. Things are so stable. Doesn't matter what you do, you kind of can't rock the boat. Other times things are very sensitive to initial conditions, so you've really got to be careful of the maths. And I think this is saying, go take these ideas with you, but go and find out what you think makes things change and emerge and stabilize.
So what if I'm a chief executive of an NHS trust, or I make organic soup or something, how can I possibly use this? Help me to find a way in for my chief exec listeners.
Yes. So, chief exec listeners, the world is complex, whether you like it or not. This is not a method. It's a description of the world we live in, and ignore it at your peril. Pretending things go to plan when they don't doesn't get you there. So
that I think every chief exec listening to this knows. Right, you can have a plan and stuff doesn't go to plan. So how does that relate to this? Help me to make the link between that lived experience and this work.
Yes. So if you're developing strategy, then partly my suggestion is that you go initially much wider then you think you have to. So you're developing strategy. What's going on in the outside world? Keep going further out. What is this very complex geopolitical situation? What are your markets doing? What are the social trends? And look at that both systemically and dynamically. So in other words, look at the past, the present, and start to think into, are there signs of change that we maybe need to take account of, or what do we think is going to happen? So apprehend this context in a much wider way before, and that I have methods to help people actually then analyze that and bring it down before you start to say, well, what should we do? But don't constrain the problem too early. Allow yourself to it feels overwhelming, but you will find out of that, if you're working with many people in that, you'll start to say, do you know what, these are the really key issues here that we really have to take account of, and let's start here. The second bit is, if you're working with strategy, is it's probably worth having a portfolio. There's no right answer. Do more than one thing. If you have a strategy that's very optimized towards the present, it's probably less able to adapt towards a sometimes fast changing and emerging future. So how do you comfort your cash cow enough, but have other irons in the fire, experiment, play around a little bit, try and understand the terrain you're working in by doing things into that terrain rather than just by analyzing it. And then the next part of it is it will not go to plan. Strategies don't go to plan. It's not a reason for not having them, but what are your methods for noticing when things are changing? Sometimes things go better than plan, and get canned because they weren't sort of central. So how are you going to develop your noticing strategies? This is a really important point that I think comes out of Taoism in particular. When will you notice change on the horizon? When will you notice these very early qualitative signs of new opportunities or new threats, or something going on in the organization? Do you walk around? Who are you connected to? And have you got the courage to say, do you know what, this isn't working, we need to change this, or give up on that, or wow, this is just come into into our vision, and this is so fantastic, we're going to try this. So that there is something about honing the idea that you can't just get there as a chief executive through analyzing and then defining a plan. You have to be able to apprehend this wider context, notice change, and feed that into what you're doing, and not be frightened of that. It doesn't mean that it's gone wrong if you're adapting, or sometimes not even adapting, just saying, do you know what, this isn't working, we're going to try something different. So that's the kind of way I talk to people.
Yeah, and in my world, going back a ways to probably late 90s and certainly 2000, there was a model which in Ashridge was known as the whirligig. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but it's the non-linear, how strategy, you spend a lot of time getting to an intent, but the intent isn't really what matters. You take that intent into a shifting world and all kinds of unexpected things happen to it. So get smart around, having a nervous system that attends to that, and some learning loops. And
no, completely. And what I would also say though is that this isn't suggesting that you merely kind of meditate and try and tune to what is emerging. It's a both and. There's a both and is said a lot in it. So we go into things with strong intent. We push into things at the same time as knowing that we may have to adapt, or we may have to do something different. So it's not a lily-livered. It's not saying it's so complex we can't know, so we'll just wait and see. So I think
and that was the problem with what got truncated into the shorthand of VUCA, was lots of people, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and lots of people said, "Oh God, so there's nothing we can do," and actually, for me, it was exactly the opposite. It was, no, there's so much more you need to do.
Yes, and I think it's also trusting more, and I think as leaders we have to help people to gain more confidence in judgment, in their subjective views of things, in going for it and seeing what happens. There's a lot in management now about, people will ask me how we're going to measure it before they've asked me how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
There's a kind of, this issue about evidence. I'm not against evidence, but sometimes the tail wags the dogs, and sometimes you have to be more sophisticated about evidence. But I think it behoves leaders to set up an environment where people can experiment, people can hone their judgment, trust their instincts a little bit. Instincts, it's something, as you'll remember, Brian Goodwin was very interested in the subject. I mean, he was a great example of the kind of complexity thinking I'm talking about. Here was a biologist who was, a computational biologist who moved his who was very interested, as in Goethe, and in this kind of honing of subjectivity. The qualitative was as important as the quantitative, in understanding what was there. And we have to, as leaders, help people move into trusting their judgment sometimes, and not just waiting for, the facts to emerge, or to be certain.
Yeah. So, Jean, we're coming up to 40 minutes, but there's definitely one other question I want to ask you, which is, you mentioned geopolitics, you mentioned global tipping points. I mean, is there anywhere, any domain to which you would love to see these ideas applied better?
I think there is a recognition in looking at these kind of big global issues that there's more of a recognition that they're interconnected. You can't talk about climate change and economic growth without talking about the two together. You can't talk about populism without talking about inequality. There's more of a recognition of that. There's more of a recognition, I think. I mean, even like the collapse word, I hear much more in spheres as well. And I think, one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that this thinking about the complex world, it's not just about understanding, maybe how an organization or a market, understanding its complexity in stable situations. It's also theorizing about, how power constellates, how lock-in happens, and how collapse happens. Those things are there as well. And I think it's not like a dire warning. I think we have to put collapse into our vocabulary with some of what's going on in the world, both in ecological terms, but also in social terms. We are perilously close to, things being very, very difficult, and some of the history shows how the extent to which gross inequality, often underpins social collapse. That in a sense, when people have no choice. So I think in particular, I'm interested in that discourse. And I think the other place where I think, it's really important, and it is there, but there's a kind of pushback, is that the sphere of management is so driven by measures and control, even more so than, when we were growing up. And it's really pernicious. And there are some stories and examples in the Dao of Complexity, which is saying, look, if we keep pretending that the world is measurable and simple, and, A causes B when it doesn't, we're both being ineffective and inefficient, and, really getting in the way of being able to do good things. So I think that kind of management sphere is also a place where these ideas have got to be heard. And although managers like methods, and, like your chief executive wants to know what to do, there's also a bit before then when you have got to rattle the cage of the worldview, and it's quite a practical and important thing to do. So this book, in a way, is kind of rattling, it's like saying,
I'm delighted. As you know, game shift, we've made the 10 years of practice out of being Trojan mice, in that we look respectable, but we are
Yes.
cage rattlers par
Yes.
excellence. And,
Completely.
I'm completely with you on it's vital, absolutely vital. Um,
Yeah.
by the way, I was last week, so was this early July or even the end of June, I can't remember, at the Global Tipping Points conference at Exeter
Oh,
University.
okay.
So uh, all of the big wigs in global tipping point work were there, as well as lots, I mean, hundreds of PhD researchers. It was brilliant to see all the work that's
Oh,
happening.
amazing.
And Rockstrom's main point when he was presenting was the interconnectedness and the non-linear interconnectedness of the tipping points. Saying, they used to speculate on it, he said, but now we're really clear in the measurement of it,
Yeah.
just how much these
Yeah.
tipping points interconnect. And
Yeah.
then he mapped out to some of the social and political connections or possible connections to these and how they were playing
Yeah.
into it. So he was very aware of
Yes.
this massive, interconnected, moving uh, mass of stuff. And it's difficult, therefore, to know exactly where to intervene.
Yes.
But there's loads of work going on, and there are some positive tipping points emerging.
And
Yeah.
maybe one just final thing to say.
Yeah.
There's a piece in the Dao of Complexity called "Simplicity on the Other Side of Complexity," and if you allow yourself to look at the whole complex picture and start to see what patterns are emerging, these kind of systemic patterns, these interconnections that you're describing, paradoxically, sometimes what to do becomes more clear. It's a bit like if you don't constrain the picture, if you can see the picture in all its complexity, its richness, sometimes the mountain or the valley or the fissure that you can make bigger becomes clearer. And I think we shouldn't be frightened of there's a difference between apprehending complexity and then sometimes going in and saying, but I'm starting here, I'm going to do this and see what happens. So
Yeah. Yeah. So what next for you, Jean?
oh
Apart from obviously an endless speaking tour, but after the endless speaking tour, what
no,
next?
no. I've just noticed I've got red when you asked me that. That's interesting. Um, one of the things that there's a couple of things that are interesting me at the moment. One of them is much more the connection between the conscious and the unconscious, and the work of presencing. I've gone back to reading Jung again, for example,
Right.
and in my scientific view, the complex world doesn't say you can only have real things that are measurable and connected by forces. It's saying everything that's there, our inner world, as well as our world of intentions and values and traumas, is there, bobbing and weaving and making decisions and acting in the outer world. There's no separation. And I'm interested in how, on the one hand, the path is made by walking is about, we co-create the future. We're doing, that's
Yeah.
about my actions and values, and it is. But there's something else going on, which is about how does the unconscious, what does that mean, the collective unconscious? How do I feel into that? And how do I sometimes feel into the something emerging in the future? It's a kind of, it connects with my ideas of quantum field theory and the work of
Mm.
a guy called Chris Clark, who wrote about, and it's the Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything, that's where the light gets in. And the kind of the paradox in quantum physics, which brings mysticism and the mystical back into science. It isn't left outside as
Yeah.
a creator or a whatever. So that area of the unconscious, the conscious, the sense, the presencing sense of something at the same time as the practical, things we can know in a more tangible way, really interests me. So that's where I'm
Beautiful.
kind of heading. So
Brilliant. Brilliant. And, I'm very much taken by what you said earlier, in that and earlier, around the path being made by walking. And tomorrow on here, I've got Rob Hopkins, coming to talk about this one, which is how to fall in love with the future,
yes,
which builds on from what is to what if and all of that.
yeah,
And the thing I love about Rob's work is it fits beautifully into
yes,
this worldview, in the sense of, he's not saying, in this he dresses up as a time traveler in a spacesuit,
yeah,
goes off to the future, comes back, says, "Good news, we won," um, but then talks about, but there are lots of other futures I've been to, and some of them are really horrible.
yes,
It's about creating a narrative in which there's enough signs of possibility of good stuff happening. And
yes,
the beauty of this book is it's not the future; it's stuff that's happening now,
yes.
and that's starting to build a path you can work with.
That's right. Prigogine said that what word did he use? Our anticipation is what brings the future into the present. It shapes the present by what we imagine about the future. The imagination is another really interesting word, and I think what you've said just summarises what my book was about. That people like Rob Hopkins, who really wants to make a difference, who's really reflective about, well, how do things really change? What's really going on? They kind of rediscover the worldview of complexity, because it has a resonance that it's hard to ignore. So I think
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
well,
absolutely. And making other connections back and forwards in this series. We've Phoebe Tickell was here with us talking about moral imaginations and moral imaginative activism, very similar. And of course, she comes from a PhD science background as well. And and at the same time, we've had Helena Clayton talking about the place of love, and Michael Cheskalson with compassion. You
yeah,
know, and they weave together rather beautifully.
yes.
Um,
Something that I haven't said, but is very much, I kind of own in the book, is I want to make the world a better place in my little way. So the idea of compassion, ethics, I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to show. I'm trying to show how these ideas, in a way, complexity theory is neutral. It tells you how bad happens and how good happens, if you want to use those simplistic words. This idea of what's love got to do with it, I think, is embedded in my take on this. If no one is safe till we're all safe, we're not going to have a sustainable future unless we take care of everybody within it. And that's very different from the neoliberal philosophy, as George Monbiot in his lovely short book on neoliberalism shows. So,
Yeah.
but so
Lovely. He did a great piece on the fundamental screwedness of the food system at tipping points last week. He did
did he?
absolutely brilliant. And
Yeah.
I've got Rob Sexton from Yo Valley, and Sue Pritchard from Food and Farming Commission, amongst others, coming to talk about food systems. So
Yes.
we'll have great fun.
Yes.
Jean, give me a moment to close off with the audience, and I'll come back to say a big thank you to you. So, everybody, thank you for being with us for this episode. It's been absolutely brilliant. Tons of connections into our other podcasts. I do encourage you to have a listen to some of the others in the About Time series. But today, Jean, enormous thanks to you. That was an absolutely brilliant tour through your life and work. Just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. It's nice to see you as well.
Yeah. Thank you.